Hey, there's Tom Jordan. It's a Friday. We got some big issues we are dealing with today. We had the jobs report that just came out about 30 minutes ago, and it is a woeful 12,000 jobs created for the month of October. I don't think I've ever seen a report that low in many, many years. 12,000 just a few days before the election. They were expecting a measly 113,000 jobs to have been created in October. It is 12,000. So we will get into that a bit later, what that means for the economy, what could that potentially mean for the election. So we're dealing with that today. Also, a lot of people who are going to vote while plugging their nose in this particular election, like the policies. They like them. They like these policies, but they hate the candidate, that kind of thing. And others, they're not willing to plug their nose at all and pull that lever at the same time because of their disdain for people like maybe Donald Trump, even though they know his policies will provide more freedoms for them individually, including economic freedom or religious freedom or freedom of speech, protecting the three branches of government, things like that, things that kind of matter. These protest votes are what some of these things are called, and they're going to, sitting it out to prove a point, but a point proven that almost certainly is going to backfire and impact them directly. So my guest today from Hillsdale College will explain why voting is not just about, showing up and casting a ballot. It's about selecting the best possible leader from the available candidates, even when the choices might be far from ideal. It's an important conversation today. Abstaining out of moral frustration isn't fulfilling the duty we have as citizens. The focus should be on the outcomes, not just the appearances. Picking the lesser of two evils is sometimes the highest form of civic responsibility. Preventing the decay and the rot that we're seeing sometimes, that these small compromises that we take can bring over many years into our political system. So that's coming up in just a few minutes, a few seconds away, actually, I should say. Also, just want to remind you, you are invited to a special election night watch party at Tom Jordan Live headquarters. Tom Jordan Live, we will be broadcasting for 4 hours election night, November the 5th from 8 p.m. to midnight, watching those returns come in from around the country as the polls close. So you can be here with me and with our staff and with a whole lot of other fun people. Smart, intelligent people, even smart, intelligent people. I'll just leave it at that. Downtown Brighton, Michigan, if you're in the Metro Detroit area, Speakeasy Studios, and we'll have more information provided at tomjordanlive.com. Drinks, food, they're going to be provided for you as well. Should be a very nice time. Also, just a reminder to chime in. You can comment, you can ask questions in the comment section. I'll get to those in a moment. Plus, if you want to ask my guest today a question, you can put him and me on the spot and put it up in the comment section. We'll get to those as well. Also, just a reminder, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, click that notification bell. You just watch the video, and if you could share these podcasts to as many people as you can, that helps us out tremendously. It's all free of charge. Obviously. All right, to the topic at hand today. I think Donald Trump is winning the messaging wars. If you've seen the last few days, Joe Biden, for example, calls Donald Trump supporters trash. So what does Donald Trump do? He dresses up as a garbage man, takes out the real trash, while the White House denies Biden ever even called Trump supporters trash, even though those were his exact words. You probably saw this video clip where liberal billionaire Mark Cuban, did you see this yesterday? It said Donald Trump has never surrounded himself with smart, strong women. This was on The View, with zero pushback from the women at that table with Mark Cuban. And Cuban, while Trump is, currently surrounding himself with plenty of strong, smart women, and there are millions of smart, strong women supporting Donald Trump. In fact, I dropped one of those off at work this morning, one of them, and that one was particularly hot, I might add. Love you, honey. So Donald Trump criticized Joe Biden, criticized Democrats, and most especially his opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, for running a campaign of hate and vitriol and retribution. So there's a lot of this out there right now, obviously, a lot of trash talk, and it gets the headlines and it buries the real serious policy issues, and it turns some people off from even voting, from going to the polls. When people lie through these gross mischaracterizations like Biden and Kamala calling Trump and his supporters Nazis, which was a socialist party, by the way. The Nazi Party. Did you realize that? It wasn't a far right party. It's a leftist party. It's socialist. But anyway, this all can be infuriating to both sides of the equation, of the political aisle. And sometimes it leads to protest votes, people not even voting at all. They want to sit this one out for the good of their conscience, they think. But voting is not about feeling good. It's about choosing who is best, even if neither one of these candidates is great. If you won't choose someone worse, someone will do it for you, right? Your vote will be canceled out necessarily, and other people are still going to vote. So someone will say, I'll never vote for Trump because someone at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. So I'm voting for Kamala Harris instead, only to at the same time ignore her name calling Trump and his, followers as all these horrific things. And, that the man that she serves with, Joe Biden, calling Trump's followers again garbage, that kind of thing gets ignored. So politics is nasty. And so sift through the noise is what you want to do and get to the meat, the root, the policies, and the values of these candidates that will impact you and your neighbors. All right, my guest today is Matthew Mehan. He's the Associate Dean of Hillsdale College's Van Andel Graduate School of Government in Washington, D.C., a phenomenal facility. It's not just in Michigan, it's in the nation's capital, and I particularly love this school. It's so nice to have you, Matthew. Thank you for your time. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
Well, so you've talked about this, you've written about it, and I hear people say, I'm not voting because my vote doesn't count, or they might say, I hate politics, I want to stay out of it. That type of thing, that type of excuse. How do you respond when you hear those excuses?
Well, I just try to do sort of the things you were setting up this discussion with, is just find a way to get them to attend to the core values or the deeper principles involved. And it seems to me most people who want to throw their hands up and walk away from making these tough decisions actually do so because they think they're being moral, right? They have a kind of a moral sensibility of like, these things are low and disgusting and base. I don't like people yelling at each other or calling names. I don't like it at all. And so I try to sort of focus their attention on their moral duty. And I do think a lot of people have over time and not just, it's almost an intergenerational decay, have come to see their duty to vote as almost a sort of plaything, as opposed to what it used to be understood as a very, I think sacred is a good word for it. I don't mean to make it on the level of religion, but the step down where when human beings use their God-given reason to make serious command decisions about governance and the common good and justice, that is a sacred duty, right? And a public trust. And so the franchise, the citizens' right, but also corresponding duty to vote, is sacred. It's a solemn duty, if you want to put it that way. And I think people sort of see it as maybe if I want to, or if I can, or if I can take it, or if I can deal with all this, I think not to be too harsh on people, but another possibly frivolous way of approaching it is, I'll use it as a sort of game. I'm going to protest vote, or do this, that, and the other thing with my vote, or my vote doesn't matter here, so I'm going to send a signal with it. It's like, that's not your job. And so I try to, and there's lots more to be said, but I try to focus their duty on, or their attention on their duty to vote, but also not just on voting, but on what is voting for? What is its end? What is its purpose? And that is the duty.
Exactly. And that is why we have, this constitutional republic in which we live, and people call it democracy. I think is a poor understanding of what a pure democracy means. Obviously, we don't live in that. But that being said, the understanding is that we have this right to go out and vote, and it is a privilege. Yes, it's a right, but it's very much a privilege. And I hear people say the same thing, that my conscience won't allow me to vote for either one of these because I don't want to be a threat to democracy, or whatever the reasoning is, with not even fully understanding that what they're doing is disengaging from this constitutional republic, which does have an ultimate impact on their own lives. I mean, specifically, it impacts every individual. So how do you think that, like, these protest votes? I mean, this gesture that they're giving, and they're sending this message to the world that I am personally better than either one of these candidates, so I'm not going to vote for either one. But how does that end up endangering the political process as a whole?
Well, I think there's a number of levels at which it does so. Let's take the most principled and high-minded one, since I think we're talking about or to people who are very high-minded and principled. So let's take it that way first. If you think that you can bow out of a duty quickly, and you set an example of doing so, that even very difficult and ugly duties that can be just sort of blown off, you're setting an example for all your fellow citizens that, if the going gets tough or if something's really hard, maybe it's better to kind of, shake it off and just be free and sort of flit away from that difficulty. That's a bad moral example. You might not see it that way, but I think it's the case, alas. But then, obviously, if you protest vote, you're trying to basically remove yourself from the voting pool as a symbol or a sign. But the much greater symbol or sign is the person who takes office, right? And so that person, and this is right out of Ciceronian Republican governance. Forgive me for being a professor of government for a second. But when you install someone in office, they are elevated above everyone else. And when you don't seek your utmost to get the least worst or therefore the best option into office, you are actually negatively or negligently participating in elevating someone who will set a much more terrible example for everyone else as to what the good is, what is justice, how to treat another human being, what is competency, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you might think, oh, I'm setting this example. Well, one, you're misusing the vote and its purpose, which is to choose an officer. That's what it's for. It's not for you to use it for moral signaling. Just like you don't use your kids to morally signal online something or to sell a product, right? Right?
Right.
You raise your kids because kids need raising. That's the purpose of parenting, not to sort of use them for your fame.
Yeah.
Just like you don't misuse the vote, right? So it winds up frustrating both the end that you think you decided to use it for, which is protest voting or signaling something about your distaste and the unacceptability of these candidates. So, but that counter signal not nearly as strong as what you're risking, which is putting the worst person as opposed to the least worst person that could be in office, and it's just wrong on its own merits.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I know it's not a perfect comparison here, but it's almost like if you're a student in school and you're out of a protest, you're not going to take your exam, and so you're going to get an F on it. There's a practicality to this, and by not voting, you're actually voting to fail in a sense like that. And you brought up a very important point, because the people that we elect into these offices, and when we choose them to go, they are given an immense amount of power. We think, well, it's a government of the people. Yeah, the people get to choose who's going to have the authority for a time temporarily over them, as it relates to how laws are made and how those laws are implemented, and whether or not they're going to be within the framework of the Constitution. And there's pushback on every side of these things right now that are very consequential. So it is a shirking of the duty. I can't help but notice, because I watch very closely the news coverage, and I've been in the news business for 25, 26 years now, and it's astounding to me what becomes news now, what and how we are informed as a population about what is truly important. And as I mentioned off the top, it becomes the name calling, or becomes someone's dictator versus in someone else's garbage, and all these different things we're missing because of, I think, a shirking of the duty of journalists in today's age. People are not as informed as maybe they used to be. And how much does that play, do you think? And a lot of people saying, well, I heard this on this newscast at 6 p.m., so I'm not going to vote for that person, or I'm not going to vote at all. How much do you think that plays into this whole protest voting that's going on?
So I do think, not to be Pollyannish or sort of a simple-minded Boy Scout, but if you do put forward, you have a duty to do this, to select an officer, well, then you're called to an act of prudence. And that's a difficult thing. That means you got to do your homework, you got to take
Hmm.
counsel, you got to read up, you got to weigh the relative merits, you got to think about what the country needs and what's most important. That's a labor. But I think it's precisely why I've been beating the drum of you actually have a duty, not just to vote, because that can be a protest or an abstention or a stupid write in to Mickey Mouse, which I don't think is doing your duty. You actually have a duty to select or choose an officer. You know you don't get to decide, but you have a duty to at least put your choice in, right? But if you have that duty, I think that gives you more motive force to do your homework and do your research. But also this other, I think, very important part, which you sort of alluded to in your setup, which is people get disgusted by politics because it's fighting, it's contentious, and most people feel like you've failed. Like at work, you feel like if you're having a fight with someone at work, you've somehow failed, right?
Hmm.
Right? Like if your kids are fighting, you failed in that moment to, parent or something, right? People feel like when there's discord and friction that something's wrong. And certainly that's true, but it's also part of human life. We're not perfect, right? So they actually have a moral disgust. But that disgust, the only way to push past disgust is for you to be convinced I actually have a duty here to push past the disgust over these imperfections, right? It's like I use the analogy of like, look, some duties are gross. You got to change your kid's diaper, right? like it's gross, but you got to do it, and so
Yeah.
you got to do the duty, right? Pun intended. But
That would,
if you
yeah. Well, that's where the plugging of the nose comes in, right? And
right,
essentially, we got to, that smells. I don't like either one of these candidates. But to that point, I mean, if it smells, how do you handle this situation where you got, okay, there's Kamala Harris, there's Donald Trump, and I'm just focusing now on the presidential election here, and people don't
sure.
like either one of these, but you still have a moral obligation and a duty to vote for either one of these candidates. So how do you, I guess, coach or advise people who are struggling with these? They view both as immoral individuals. How do you then walk them through the process of coming to a decision on which one is less moral than the other or more moral than the other?
So I I think there are key and fundamental goods that I put forward and try to bring everyone's attention to. And this is my own political opinion here. Here I'm not speaking as just a perfectly, this is my piece on ethics of voting. But I do think it's the ethic, which is let's start with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? If the pursuit of happiness can't be found in this life and is in the afterlife, as I think most people believe in one way or another, right? Which is why we have limited government, because the government can't control our lives such that they can calculate our happiness perfectly, because happiness for human beings is beyond politics. Well, okay, so who's the one who's going to preserve that liberty for the pursuit of happiness? And who's the one who's going to be most concerned with life? Now, that's why I do think Trump has a lot of steam power on his foreign policy, fewer wars and less violence around the globe, sort of his peace through strength, which people look at, and that's one of his most convincing arguments on the trail, right? Liberty, you have to ask which one is going to protect those rights of free speech, which one's going to protect the right to your own property, to like make associations and build businesses and do the things that make you happy and healthy. That's another one. And then, like I said, the pursuit of happiness. Which one is trying to settle the questions about how everybody should think, act, and live
Hmm.
when we know that a large and somewhat corrupt government, which everyone agrees that that's the case, is
Hmm.
not the best group to set those final ends for human happiness, right? And so I think right now, in a special way, those are key: peace, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which, right out of our declaration, it's not that complicated in a certain sense. But I would focus people's attention on that. But I also think truth. We're in a republic, a democratic republic, right? Which means we have to hear what the other person thinks and says, and we have to have a reasonable expectation that what you're saying is what you're thinking, and what you're saying about what you're going to do is what you're going to do. And that, to my mind, is a major way of weighing candidates. Which one's telling you the truth? which one lies more often, which one is hazier, more deceptive, cloudier, more obfuscating. And I think there's a big debate about that between the parties, but I think those are ways of sorting this out pretty easily. Not easily, pretty basically. Like, it is a successful thing you can do, and that those are the sort of easy and first criteria that I would put forward.
You are touching on something that I find is so incredibly important that we as a country are getting away from is how do you determine what somebody is saying is actually what they is saying is matches what they actually are thinking or what their intentions are. And the way we get to that is through what now our country doesn't want to do, argumentation. And it seems that our government was set up to do just that with the various branches, holding each other accountable, going at it. We have debate on these various, the House floor, the Senate floor. We debate, we argue. There is this, I think, this messaging and narrative out there that if we debate and argue, we're not unified somehow. And I'll just say, it's not maybe your opinion or not, but I look at the Democratic Party and I can see them saying, see, we're all doing the exact same thing without arguing publicly, which means we're a united party. And then they point to the the Republicans who are debating and arguing and pushing on one another. And they look at that as being uncivil. And they're arguing, they're not united as a party. And I'm like, no, that's how it should be. So we can get to some realm of what is true here, what is the best outcome, and it's not easy to get to. Isn't that how our government is set up, don't you think? And there's a reason for that. What would be your reason if you subscribe to what I just said here? The importance of argumentation to eventually get to the truth of what one of these candidates truly means and truly intends if he or she becomes elected to that office.
Yes. So let me take this from like a very small perspective of a person's morality, and then expand it out to the American Republic. Because I'm an Article 1 guy. We need Congress to have debates again. We need to make law and actually think through things in a more candid and open and adversarial way that is not, I would say, and this is not even a Christian principle. Even Cicero would say, this is in accord with caritas or charity, right? You can have love for your fellow man, not even Christian divine love. You can have love for your fellow man while having an argument with them, right? Like, that's totally
Yes.
legitimate. So agreed. But I actually think there's a certain kind of moral corruption that people who think they're very moral think that manners and politeness, right, which comes from the word politics, right, and polish, etc. But it's tricky, but that it does. That sort of understanding, right? That, oh, if I'm in an argument, or take this, an ad hominem attack, like that guy's a liar, right? They go, oh, that's not charitable, that's not mannerly, that's bad, that's a logical fallacy. I'm like, no, okay, it's a logical fallacy in terms of you're making an argument one must assent to that's not probable, but is absolutely the case. So that is not a good argument. But in rhetoric, in public discussion, it's actually an act of justice and charity to shame someone who is being bad, and also to warn everyone else that this person, what he's saying, isn't true, or is less likely to be true, and therefore not likely for him to be best choice for holding office, he or she, I should say, in this presidential election for sure, that because they might be a liar, like, that's actually an important thing to do. And that could be completely consistent with charity. And you could even call someone else. For instance, I tell Christians who get upset about this, I speak to mostly Christians very often at the Hillsdale's a Christian college, but I tell them, like, so, oh, you can't do ad hominem attacks. It's not Christian charity. I'm like, so do you think Jesus hated the Pharisees when he said, you brood of vipers? I thought Jesus loved all his children, right?
Right.
But you can rip somebody pretty hard in public to try to rattle their conscience to change, and to warn everybody else about the danger of a candidate or a person, and by rattling everybody else, also to try to help that person to change. If you think one of these parties gets annihilated at the polls because of tough rhetoric where the other person successfully condemns the other candidate, and that candidate and that party have to go into the wilderness, don't you think that will help them get closer to virtue by reforming and stop being so foolish, radical, dishonest, etc.? Right? This is not incommensurate with justice, friendliness, peace, and charity to have a peaceful forum for free speech. And as uh, Cicero, again, the great defender of Republican government, said, sharp elbows when there is competition for high office, which is
Yeah.
expected and okay.
It's so good, and we do have a misunderstanding of charity or love. And you brought up Jesus was, he called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. They're dead inside, but they look so nice on the outside. Or Paul the Apostle, I think it was him that quoted one of the scholars of Crete saying Cretans are always liars and brutes. And those are strong words in order to warn somebody when you go to Crete, be careful because this is who they are. And hopefully they will change by that tough discussion out of love, right? And it is supposed to be done in kindness and compassion, but in truth. And this is what I think a you talk to a lot of Christians, you say, and some of the Christians I'll speak to as well. I'll say, listen, it's kind of imperative. Christianity is not about being civil and letting people get away with whatever they want, because ultimately, if you do that, it ends up hurting people you love. If someone over here is going to go after your child, you want to call that person over there out before they go after your child. And it's the same thing in our civil discourse. It's the same thing, I think, biblically speaking. That should be a priority to make sure you highlight those who are at odds and get them to convert to the truth, not to your own ideology, but to the truth. Maybe it's biblically or whatever your standard is. So it's incredibly important. So to that end, I mean, do you think that there's enough Christians right now? Not enough. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know there are tens of millions of Christians who are going to likely sit out of this election because they don't want to engage in politics here in the United States. So what do you say to them?
So I think you said it just now with you gave a number of further examples from scripture. I would just add one. I can't pull it. Forgive me. My memory is weak, but there is a line in Paul's letters where he basically says, "Look, if you have to call out these sins, these wrongdoings, it even brings shame upon the person rightfully doing the just accusation." Right? Meaning, your honor in this life isn't the most important thing. And if you overly worry and don't have a certain Christian detachment from your honor, your public and even personal honor, right? Even that is a good that must be spent down,
Yes.
like a
Yes.
rich man must spend down, right? Because you
Hmm.
can't take it with you. And Paul sort of alludes to that, like, look, there's things that are ugly and rough that you get smirched by, right? Do you think a prosecutor wants to go after the pederast and be in the headlines meddling with that all the time? It's gross and it makes everyone feel gross, but they darn well better do it if it's their duty, right? And if it's not their duty, then maybe they should stay away from it because they should use their honor in another way. But you have a duty to cast a vote and pick an officer. And the only way you can relieve yourself of that duty, I think, right, is if they are identical, the candidates are actually identical, right? Or you have somehow dissolved the republic and that office no longer exists of
Hmm.
citizen. But you
Hmm.
have that office and you don't get to just willy nilly sort of say, I don't feel like it. Hashtag, I can't even. I can't besmirch my honor and do that. I'm like, I'm sorry. That's not real honor. That's not the honor that you accrue in heaven, right?
Yeah.
That's not the honor
Right.
amongst the wise. It's actually the false honor of the world. So if you feel like you're sitting it out, right, and not actually doing the hard labor of winnowing down the options such that you can say this is the best and most likely candidate, not a dream candidate that doesn't exist, like I'm going to write in the ghost of Abraham Lincoln or something, right? But an actual person who could win, or Vermin Supreme protest voting, right?
Right. Right.
That you actually have a duty to do that, and I think that simple adherence to duty, the old Roman age quod agis, do what you're doing. Don't make what you're doing about something else. Make it about the thing in front of you. That's actually virtue.
Hmm.
And I think we've lost that with a lot of gamification of the vote
Hmm.
and a kind of over appraisal of our own personal dignity uh, vis-a-vis our personal duties.
Yeah, it is a serious responsibility. And my view is that if you've become a U.S. citizen or you're born into that, it's a wonderful place to live and it's a wonderful thing to be a citizen of this great country. But with that comes great responsibility. And primarily that means that on this time of this particular season, you've got to cast a vote for whoever you deem, after some research on your own, the homework that's required, the research, the digging into getting through all that noise that is out there meant to manipulate you and steer you in a different direction. Do your research, figure out who aligns with your true value, and I would say constitutional values, in order to pick the right candidate.
Yeah, and counsel. It's one of the things that people trying to shame anyone about mentioning Trump,
Huh,
right? Like, don't even talk
right,
about him. How dare you?
right.
Then that means you can't actually talk to your neighbor about the relative merits. Like, if it's just like, oh, it's outrageous, right? Well, how can you actually weigh relative merits? So that's sort of shutting down. We call it cancel culture,
Yeah.
ostracization, which is a kind of radicalization of a bad form of democratic republicanism, where if you have an opinion that's wrong, you're out of the community, right? Those sorts of those bad habits. It's like, no, it's precisely then. I mean, I even tell like people, if you're a Kamala person and you're in the tank for Kamala, right? Shouldn't you absolutely be very interested in making sure everybody says what they're interested in, like instead of shutting them down? Because wouldn't you want to give them counsel and address their counter arguments? It's very foolish and counterproductive, and it's not a good sign for Team Kamala, I think.
No,
But it's
it's not.
dangerous to not have counsel. You have to have counsel. That's part of prudence.
Right. But again, and there is an ideology out there that doesn't believe all speech is equal, and some of that speech needs to be shut down. So that in and of itself is very telling. I really love what you're doing, and I absolutely love Hillsdale College. But I want to thank you for coming on the program, Dr. Matthew Mehan with Hillsdale College. You're in D.C., right? You're in the D.C. branch out there.
Yes, in fact, we're remodeling and doubling the size of our campus. So I'm in a townhouse nearby right now while we're under construction.
Oh, good for you. Well, I love the growth of Hillsdale, and I hope it just keeps spreading, and the message of, the constitutional message out there and values, traditional values of America keep spreading, and Hillsdale College is on the forefront of it. So I can't thank you enough. Matthew, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Well, it's an important thing. We've got to keep discussing these things, and I go back to the argumentation aspect of this, and this is how our country was founded. It was to allow, speech of all different types, all stripes, to get in. If you're an American citizen and you subscribe, you have to, as a U.S. citizen, to the Constitution, then get into the fray, so to speak, and start arguing, start sharing your, vociferous opinions on the issues at play in this current culture, and try to align them. Does it match the Constitution? And by the way, if you don't subscribe to the U.S. Constitution, what you're basically saying is you don't like the United States and you don't want to be a citizen of this country. And so, because that is the document, the values and the thoughts that go into that document, yeah, they are biblical values. And the reason why they're good is that they protect every single individual in this country from oppression. That's the Constitution. Don't buy into all that noise you hear out there that we got to get rid of the Constitution because it is inherently racist. It is not. It protects every race, every creed, every gender from oppression. And when there have been failures to uphold those values, it's not because of the founding document. It's not its fault. It's the people who have not subscribed to it. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Deal with the issues, the way we've gone astray, and then go back to the foundational principles of this country, which espouses that people are created in the image of God. Therefore, you've got to treat them well. You can't oppress them or strip away their God-given rights. Those are constitutional values. So as you're looking at these candidates, figure out which one most aligns with those values that are American values. And if they don't, they might be wanting to change the country into something else, maybe some other country in Europe or worse. All right. We are going to get into today's jobs numbers and what that means, because this is an astounding number that came out today, just ahead of the election, what's going on here with the economy and what the Fed now might do in their upcoming meeting on rates. But first, let's play a little bit of what Donald Trump had to say from the passenger seat of a garbage truck. Take a look.
Any questions?
Sir, RFK Jr. said that you promised to control the public health agencies if you were to win. Is that accurate?
I can't. You have to speak loud.
Sir, RFK Jr. said that you promised him control of public health agencies if you were to win. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Well, we'll work with him, and he's a very talented guy. He wants women's health. He wants health for people, and we're going to work with him. He's a very, very talented guy. He's a friend of mine.
Did you know that Elon Musk was
the other day from the Democrats going to Backfire?
I think the Democrats have done a very poor job. We're leading in every state. We're leading big, and I think that the comment made by really both of them, because there are really two of them, about being garbage, maybe 250 million people, they shouldn't be talking. That's like deplorable for Hillary. This is the deplorable for Hillary. And I think this is worse, actually. For Joe Biden to make that statement, it's really a disgrace.
President Trump, you said the other day that the military could be used, that the military or the National Guard could be used on election day if necessary. Can you explain what you mean by that in the details?
I don't think they'll have to be used. I think we're going to have a big victory. And I think 250 million people in this country are going to be very happy because we're going to bring the country back. We're a nation in decline, very, very serious decline. And we're going to bring our country back.
Did you know that Elon Musk was in close contact with President Putin? Did you know about this? Did you know about Elon Musk calls and close communication with President?
Elon is a great guy. He's one of our geniuses, and we have to protect our geniuses. We have to take care of our
Mr.
geniuses.
President, there's a report that
Too
you...
many of them. Yes, please.
You owe the people of Puerto Rico an apology for what the comedian said.
I love Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico loves me. I don't know anything about a comedian. I love Puerto Rico. Nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me. I took care of them when they had the big hurricanes, and nobody gets along better with Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican people than me. They love me, and I love them. Go ahead. What do I want? I don't know anything about the comedian. I don't know who he is. I've never seen him. I heard he made a statement, but it was just a statement that he made. He's a comedian. What can I tell you? I know nothing about him. I don't know why he's there. You put comedians up, and I guess he went on earlier in the show. I don't know who he is.
Did you make a joke with you? Is Steve Bannon going to campaign with you now that he's out of prison?
I don't know, but I think he's a terrific guy. I think he was treated very unfairly.
Mr. President, you've been talking about Democrats cheating. Could you imagine any circumstances under which you would be defeated but not say that the election was stolen?
If it was a corrupt election, that could happen. But so far, we're doing pretty well. They found a lot of smaller things in Pennsylvania, as you know, and I think they've been corrupted and taken care of. They were corrupt. They were corrupted, but I think it's been taken care of.
On that subject, you called for law enforcement to investigate.
I was going to say, do you anticipate to declare victory on election night?
I hope that we're going to declare a victory. I mean, they spend all that money on machines. Paper ballots cost you 8% of what a machine costs, 8%. And it's encrypted paper, it's watermarked paper, it's very secure. Your elections would be over at 10 o'clock, and that's when you can announce something and there would be no question. And we're not talking about more money, we're talking about a tiny fraction of the money. You want paper, ideally, you want one-day voting, and I think it's just very important. You have to have the country and you have to have voter ID, and you have a great election.
Yeah, so it's a big election coming up on Tuesday. In fact, early voting is already underway, and I want to get into our executive wealth management look at the economy and the financial implications of some of these, maybe some of these policies, but really what's even happening today with these job numbers. I'm looking at them, and it's 12,000 new jobs. They were expecting 113,000 new jobs, and that was lower. That was a low amount, when compared to previous months, even though they've downgraded a lot of those numbers. I think it was 800,000 for the year or whatever. They start doing that major correction on the number of jobs, but it's also the types of jobs that are being created. These are primarily government funded, taxpayer funded jobs, and the private industry is hurting. A lot of layoffs happening. But just read the numbers from this morning. A pretty cooling economy, if you want to say that, to say the least. Not matching the optimism that is often portrayed by certain journalists and, of course, this White House. But October saw only 12,000 new jobs, 12,000. And again, that was expected to be a low 113,000. Unemployment held steady at 4.1%. But there's been a lot of, downward revisions on the real jobs pictures out there. You look at the revisions for August and September. It's really a less robust job market that we're seeing ourselves in if you break it down. And it makes you wonder, since it's crunch time, the economy's health right now prior to an election, who's been in office the past 3.5 years, as we've seen major inflation. We kind of wonder what the Fed is now going to do with this latest jobs number out there. So as we're dealing with this, we want to bring in our expert. It's Bert Herzog. He is the founder of Executive Wealth Management, EWMadvisors.com. We're going to talk about the slowdown in job growth, what's behind it, and what the impacts are maybe for you. Bert, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Tom. Good to see you.
It's nice to have you. All right, so your initial reaction, I know there were some natural disasters that had occurred in recent weeks, and that may have impacted the jobs numbers, but 12,000 new jobs when we're used to seeing, 150 or 200,000 or 250. They were expecting 113,000 this go around, but they got 12,000. Did you expect that at all?
No, they expected close to 100,000 in jobs this time around, even with the hurricane and the strikes going on. However, I think that what it does do, it virtually guarantees that the Fed will move forward on cutting the interest rates again. It depends on where the final numbers come in, whether it'll be 0.25 or 0.5 on the interest rate cuts. The economy certainly is struggling right now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. In fact, that the markets are up today is a reason why they're up.
That was strange to me. Why is that the case?
Well, because they had anticipated a much stronger job number, and they thought that the Fed may pause on the interest rate cuts.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now that the Fed has kind of been put in a position where they're going to have to cut interest rates, the market has responded positively. Remember, the markets tend to be 6 months in advance of where the economy might be headed. So I do think that the market reaction is not really a reaction of where the economy is going. I think, Tom, that we might be in a position to see a mild recession next year.
You think so? And I've heard the same thing from other people who are, experts in the economy and finance as well. That might be the case. But you look at, some of these factors, and I know there's been a lot of talk about, job creation. We've heard that from, President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that they've created more jobs. But these are the types of jobs that are, taxpayer funded. They're not the kind of jobs maybe that contribute to the economy as we would like to see. What's your analysis of that?
And that's a real problem. Manufacturing jobs and business service jobs are down the last 2 months. It's been government jobs and healthcare jobs that are up. And really, you're not going to sustain a market recovery when the government jobs are taking over the private sector. Ultimately, that is a path to disaster. And we need to figure out a way to turn this thing around, and we need to do it quickly to not turn a potential mild recession into a deep recession.
So to that point, because a lot of people who want a job, they're like, hey, great, I work for the government. I got all these great benefits. I got a great paycheck. And I don't care if it's private industry or government industry. But maybe they should care because it does have a direct impact on not only on the economy, but the future of our economy in our country. And it's a different ideology when you think about the government is now going to be providing your incomes versus private industry. What are the potential ramifications of that if we continue down this trajectory?
Well, that's the classic dilemma. How do you fund those public jobs, the government jobs? By raising taxes.
Right.
So that means there's less money in your pocket. That means there's less private sector jobs being created. That means that less consumption, less spending in the economy, and it creates a situation that is a vicious circle. So the government continues to grow, continues to create more jobs that are publicly funded, and guess what? We all become poorer.
That is necessarily what happens. It's been tried over and over again. We have many, many case studies of this in our history and just in current day,
Absolutely.
monetary theories from other countries and the way it's disrupting, private industry and those types of things. The recent strikes in manufacturing, how much does that play in, do you think, in these jobs numbers that came out? And, is it a good thing? I mean, it seems in my perspective that there's been more and more strikes in the past 3 years than any time that I've seen, at least in recent memory. Are those good, bad? How do they impact the economy overall, strikes?
Well, certainly it's impacted the most recent numbers. However, I don't think that having strikes are good long-term for the economy. It's eerily reminiscent of what happened in the 70s where we had a lot of these strikes.
Yes.
Automobile strikes,
Right.
et cetera. So you're seeing that all across the board. The administration is promoting that and saying, hey, that's a good thing. We're trying to get people more money. But actually, it's very disruptive to our economy. And typically what happens when the economy is going well, they settle. They say, hey, you know what? We as a company can afford to pay you more money. We as a company want to share in our profits. Right now, companies are looking at the numbers and saying, holy cow, we're struggling. Prices are going up. Our supply chain prices are going up. And you want a 70% increase over 4 years? I don't think that's going to happen. So it's really a conflicting situation that really isn't healthy for our economy long term. We certainly want to take care of the working men and women in our country, but we want to do it in a way that continues growth, that is fair for both sides, and that doesn't shut down the operations and the supply chains of our economy.
Yeah, when there's real oppression happening in the workforce, yeah, that's a good thing to do that. But when people are striking who are making $120,000 a year, that's a different situation, a different context as how necessary these strikes are. I want to talk a little bit about the election coming up. Because right now we kind of have a divided federal government only because the GOP has the majority in the House, but the Senate, of course, is owned and operated by the Democratic Party, as is the White House right now. How important, is a divided government better for the economy overall, or is the fact that it may be a single party has control of the House, the Senate, and the White House better for the economy? What's your take on that?
Well, the historical take has always been a divided economy is good for, or a divided government is good for the economy. However, in this situation where we are being dominated by the far left on the Democratic side, I don't necessarily think that is good for the economy right now. I believe that we need to have a policy situation that demands probably a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and hopefully a Republican administration that will kind of get us back on track, reducing regulation, coming up with a tax plan that works for everybody, extending the current Trump tax cuts, making sure that we're in a situation where we're going to grow this economy fairly and consistently for everybody. And I do think that we don't need more government spending. We don't need more government jobs. What we need to do is ignite the private sector. And it's not going to happen with providing more social programs. We've got to provide incentives for private companies to move their industries back here, manufacture in our country, and put us in a position where we can compete globally.
Yes. I think, when you bring up social programs, the reason why we might, quote, need more social programs in people's minds is because, and I'll just say, the Democratic Party has put in these regulations and higher taxes that suppress profits and suppress incomes, which mean more people are living in poverty. Therefore, they need more social programs to help them out. And then again, the government comes back in to do it. And it's just horrific circular or cycle that people can never get out of. And we see this happening, this mentality, this like a modern monetary theory and the way they think about finance. We see it playing out in many municipalities in this country that have spent decades with the vast majority of their citizens living in poverty. And I would say in many cases it's directly tied to their beliefs on how the economy should run and how much the government should be stepping in to quote unquote help you by keeping you at that certain level of income for the rest of your days and for the rest of your children's days and your grandkids' days. It really does matter. I would agree with you. I think that in this particular case, because there's such a different ideology about the theories of government intervention and monetary theory, it's so opposing to one to the other. It's either government or private industry. So to that point, do you like the idea of lower taxes on things even like tips and maybe no taxes on Social Security and those kinds of incomes that are coming in, maybe on overtime? Donald Trump has proposed those kind of tax breaks for those particular different scenarios, tips, overtime, Social Security. What do you think?
Obviously, that we're in a political environment, and those are things that ring very, very dominant to those people that are getting Social Security and tips, et cetera. It'll be negotiated.
Yes.
We are going to have a divided Senate and a divided House, so it's not going to happen overnight. I think tips are the easiest thing to get through. We'll see on the overtime. That becomes a little bit sticky. You got Social Security taxes, and you got a variety of different things that happen. You can play games with that scenario very easily. Hey, well, I was only worked 30 hours. Could you throw 10 hours over here in the overtime scenario? I'm not saying that that's going to happen across the board. But it is easier to cheat. Yes, it is easier to cheat. Social Security, I think, is a bit of a different animal. I think someone making $250,000 a year can afford and getting Social Security over the age of 67 probably is going to still be taxed. Yeah. But for those who are in the range where having tax-free Social Security with their incomes between $100,000 and $250,000 a year is highly attractive. And it helps them, and it helps our economy. They have more dollars to spend. They can travel. They can consume more. So I think that they're very, very good ideas. We'll just see how a divided government will make that happen.
I think these bold claims and promises are part of a negotiating tactic. You start big, then you go down from there back and forth until you come to some reasonable solution that hopefully benefits everybody. At Executive Wealth Management, what do you tell your clients as maybe some of them are a little hesitant to, invest or be more bold or to take more risks or fewer risks when they're investing in the market? How do you kind of counsel them and help them navigate through the current political climate?
Well, the first thing they should do is get advice. Doing it by yourself typically doesn't work. What we are doing right now is reducing risk and rebalancing. We've had a good run the last 2 years. Yeah. And typically someone who is in a moderate risk profile has grown from 60% to above 70% equity exposure. Hey, take some of those gains off the table. Pay yourself. And that's what we are recommending right now for our clients, rebalancing. We're still optimistic long term. We want to make sure that based on your horizons that you're invested in the equity markets, you're invested in the capital markets. That's the key to beating inflation long term. Yeah. However, the old saying is, and I hate to say this, Tom, but pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. So now might be the time to take some profits off the table.
Yeah. I love that saying. I don't hate saying that. It's a beautiful phrase. Very eloquent the way you put that. Bert Herzog, Executive Wealth Management. Real quick, you're thinking again, Jerome Powell, about 0.25%?
I think that's pretty much locked in. Yeah. It might even go a half, but I doubt it. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the 70s, and the trend lines are moving towards a quarter.
Yeah, you don't want to go back to the 70s. And the early 80s was tough to dig out of those horrible policy decisions in the 1970s under that Jimmy Carter administration, by the way. Thanks so much. Bert Herzog, Executive Wealth Management. It's good to see you, as always.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
You got it. Those are my guys, by the way. Executive Wealth Management. You got to check them out. They're really good stuff. All right, do we have some comments, some questions, some things? Cameron Harris has just been, let's start off with the first one. We got a few here. Let's start off with Taz. Taz is back. Government jobs should never be included in the jobs report. Including government jobs in a jobs report is like including gauging the health of a fish population and including sea lampreys. I have no idea what a sea lamprey is, but I take it it's not a fish. And you could maybe use the word squid. I know what a squid is. That's not really a fish, I guess is what you're saying, right? I agree with you. At least clarify, okay, these are the amount of government taxpayer jobs in this report. These are the numbers of, and they do, you could break it down, but of course you got a media that's just going to say the jobs numbers are out and look how great they are. Not to mention the fact that 70% of them, or whatever the number is, were created by you, the taxpayer. You are funding it. And it ends up meaning that the cost of living is going to go up, and that includes your taxes, because you've got to continue to fund more in a growing number of these government-related jobs. So is that an accurate view of the economy? No, I agree with you, Chaz. I don't think it is. And they should clearly delineate the difference between jobs that are being created in these jobs report. But it's out today. It's horrific. 12,000 jobs. That is it for the month of October. And, they were expecting 113, which they were saying was a bad number. 12,000, that was it. Amazing. Taz, thanks so much. Let's bring another one up here. This one is from Charles Beatty's back. Hey, Jamie Raskin stated they must explain on January 6, 2025, that Trump is disqualified and prepare for a civil war type scenario. Can you believe they're doing this? Jamie Raskin, by the way, was a member of Congress from Maryland. He sat on the January 6th committee, and he was saying that with Donald Trump, by not certifying or encouraging others to not certify the election on January 6, 2021, that was an attempt of insurrection, to overthrow the government. So he's doing the same thing here. And by the way, Jamie Raskin specifically did the exact same thing in January of 2017. He voted to not certify the election of Donald Trump because he thought he was illegitimately elected. It was the same argument that Donald Trump was making in 2021 that Jamie Raskin was making in 2017, amongst a slew of other Democrats are making the same argument. It wasn't new to try to get people not to certify the election back in 2020. That wasn't a new thing at all. It had been done many times over. But somehow, because of this disdain for the guy who has a tinge of orange on his skin, you hate him so much, suddenly it's a crime and it's an attempted coup, an insurrection. I'm glad you brought that up because Jamie Raskin has again said, listen, we may not want to certify this election on January 6, 2025, because we think he may have been illegitimately elected. And let's prepare now for a civil war. What does that mean? Is he calling the troops together? It's dangerous rhetoric, and it's at the very best completely hypocritical for Jamie Raskin to do that. Charles, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Let's bring up another one here. We have got time for Dave Thompson. Easy fix. Get rid of the politicians. Vote for the issues. I think I know what you're saying there, Dave. Yeah, don't think about the politician. Think about what they stand for. What is the issue they care about or they say, and they're going to because of your own research and using argumentation to get to some matter of the truth, some nugget. What do these people really believe? Can you take them at face value? Likely not. So, yeah, get rid of the politicians. Get rid of Orange Man Bad. Get rid of Kamala Harris or whatever you think, and just think, okay, what do they stand for? And how does that align with the values of the United States, the Constitution? How does that align with it? And if they don't, you might want to consider that as kind of throw that one away, that policy, and just keep doing that. And that's a great way to approach it. Dave, thanks so much. Got time for one more here, and we'll bring it to Annie. Great guest. Yes, please vote and vote early if possible. Annie, thanks so much. I really appreciate that, as always. And I thank you for making us a part of your morning and your day here. Tom Jordan Live. It's been a great week. For episode 35, Monday, we got a great program all lined up already. We'll tell you about it there. We're going to deal with PSYOPs and the whole idea of what disinformation is and the narrative that's being put out there by an expert, a guy who studies PSYOPs, psychological warfare, to get you to manipulate you to do something you wouldn't otherwise do. It is happening big time as we approach Tuesday, November 5th, this election. So we'll break that down coming up on Monday. Until then, have a fantastic weekend. God bless you. We'll see you then.